Welcome to our webinar. I'm your host, Sam Cantro. This webinar is called Compliance Madness, Creating a Game Plan for Your Business. It's March Madness. That's the theme that we have. And we've got some guests here, and we have lots of guests that are here, which is fantastic. I want to introduce everybody to all of our guests. We have, first and foremost, and you guys are going to actually, let's have you all introduce yourself and tell us where you're coming from.
Sure. Hi, my name is John Newman. I'm an Assistant Attorney General for the state of Connecticut, and I work in the Privacy and Data Security section.
I'm Sal Marino. I'm the Director of Business Development at Charles IT.
I'm Hital Shah. I'm VP of Admin and Quality at Airx Rubber Products.
And hi, I'm Paul Lavoie, Connecticut's Chief Manufacturing Officer.
So we have lots of VIPs here today. And that means if you guys have questions, we would love to hear those questions in there. The topic of conversation we're going to talk about is compliance. And I appreciate you guys being here as the experts for me that are going to help. We were laughing and joking because for the last 15 minutes, we've been chatting about this and we could have been on talking to you guys before then, but we're going to do it all over again. We will have a Q&A at the end of this. So if you have any questions, please write that in the question section. We will answer those questions as quickly as we can. And make sure that your microphones are muted. That is the little bit of information that I have to give you. All right, we're going to move straight into it. Regulatory compliance. Who wants to start this? What is it? For somebody that's a layman like myself, for someone who has to be in compliance, what is it? Someone tell me. Anybody?
I guess I'll start.
Go for it.
Regulatory compliance is just understanding and knowing the rules that you're supposed to be adhering to, the laws. And just keep in mind that all the laws and rules exist for a particular reason. And if you understand that reason, you'll probably be in compliance pretty soon.
Of course, the lawyer starts to says the laws and the okay, so from a broad range when it comes to compliance, what are these things that have to be checked off, right? Hital, you guys have to do that. You run a company. Tell me a little bit about the process of being able to just have that started and just get to where you need to get to.
For any company, right? And depending on the industry that you support, there are different types of compliance that requires, right? Some are definitely necessary to do business in certain industries, like we are manufacturing, right? So we have to do the CMMC or NIST compliance. And then there are some other ones. If you're in a medical industry, you have your own compliance that you're dealing with. But it's the core of your business. Like you have to treat it as one of your main thing that you are doing it for business because it's necessary, right? That's how we look at it. Like just being in compliance is not an option. It's a necessity to run your business. And then you have to do whatever it takes to be in compliance if you want to keep your current, customer base or the business in it.
I want to pick on you for a little bit and ask how hard that is to do. Is it super easy? Is it just check boxes, right? So for the layman, for somebody that's like me that doesn't know the sheet or the sheets or the pages worth of things that you have to check boxes off for, is it a hard process?
It's not if you have the right team. So that's the big part of like, you have to treat it as like, as a project, right? And then make sure you have the right people assigned to the right, like just for an example, right? If you're trying to comply with CMMC, then you got to have an internal person who is managing your internal day-to-day. If you're working with an IT MSP, you have to make sure you have the right support team. Then it's not hard because then everybody's doing their own part. And then at the end, it's coming together where it helps you be in compliance. So I would say, no, it's not hard. It's a lot of work and you have to know what you're targeting. So you need to know your target and then you have to have a plan, a phase plan, I must say, to achieve it eventually. So, yeah.
Well, you've been in the space for a little while, a little bit, a couple of years. Tell me about your experience from sort of the end of running companies and also where you are in your role.
The challenge, absolutely, the challenge for small to medium-sized businesses, especially in the manufacturing sector, Hital's right that if you have a plan and you understand what you're doing and you have the right resources, the challenge that most of our manufacturers are facing is the constant increase of compliance issues that are coming through that are quite frankly the ticket to admission to a lot of their work, right? So for example, I need to be compliant with quality. And I need to have certain quality certifications, and I have to maintain that compliance. I need to have certain cybersecurity protocols in place to do certain kinds of businesses, certain kinds of business and things like that. And for a small to medium sized manufacturer, it can get a little overwhelming for you. It can get a little overwhelming and to say, what should I be compliant in? Why should I be compliant in it? And what benefit am I going to get? Other than I just might have the possibility of getting some work from one of these, larger companies and from one of these larger OEMs. So I think we struggle a little bit with that. The other thing that we'll struggle with is that it costs money to do this, and compliance issues tend to be unfunded mandates, if you will, especially if they're coming from the federal government or they're coming from your customer. Your customer will tell you need to be compliant in this, and this. We were joking earlier, no customer says to you, you need to be compliant in this, and this. And by the way, here's a check for you to go and be compliant in this. It's bake it into the quote that you're going to give me. And oh, by the way, can you reduce the quote, please? Because we want to get a better price. And so you have this economic pressure that around, and again, when you think about it, we can cite examples of compliance where even big companies have squeezed to the point where they're not following their own compliance protocols, and you're starting to see that. Ask Boeing how that's going. For example, with squeezing their suppliers and having quality and compliance go out the window and having doors fall off of planes. This is the seriousness of not being compliant, but it's also the seriousness of a large manufacturer continue to put pressure on the supply chain on price, where they have to make value decisions on what they're going to invest in and to survive. This is not for anything else. These aren't people that are owning mansions all over the world, and they're trying to make payroll every week, and they're trying to survive, and they're trying to grow their business and invest in their business. So when you think of the compliance landscape, it really is a ticket to admission. But when you start stacking compliance requirements on a small to medium sized manufacturer, you stress that manufacturer, and they start to make value decisions on what they can and what they can't do.
Yeah, and Sal,
my experience.
I mean, you obviously have worked with a lot of companies, right? And you've seen them come to you with being out of compliance, right? What are some of the headaches? What are some of the pain points that these companies are facing when they come here and they go, what do we do?
Yeah, there's a ton of different things that go into that conversation, right? Because oftentimes there's no baseline, or they haven't started down the compliance journey yet, and most aren't prepared to understand first and foremost the cost that it will take, which has been talked about. But the other part is the actual operational changes to your business that it takes. And a lot of people talk about just multi-factor authentication and how that in most companies is one of the least favorite things that gets implemented across any cybersecurity initiative, because people don't want to have to take the token from their phone or carry the little fob.
You're smirking. Is this a sore subject for you?
The number of fact patterns that begin with compromised credentials that could have been resolved simply by employing multi-factor authentication is every single one of them.
Yeah. It's true. And those things are where organizations, they come in and they're like, okay, I need to start doing this. Or they have a conversation. They're like, I'm trying to go for a DoD contract. And we start talking to them about the cost of what it's going to take to be able to get to CMMC. And, we're just assessing it. It's the cybersecurity protocols, the services, the support that you need, the ongoing management of it. And then, by the way, you also now will need to be audited by a third-party auditor. So there's an additional cost on top of it. Whereas before we could just say yep, you've done all these things. Here's the SSP and your POAM, and here's your score, and you're off to the races. Now you have to add an additional expense to get actually audited. And it's actually changing the course of whether or not some companies are even bidding on some of the contracts, because they're it's just not worth, this is 10% of my business. Be okay, it's not worth it. So we're helping try to navigate some of those things. But for us, it's really just more educating of like where the baseline is, where do you need to start, what are the main things that you should be thinking about from an overall like business standpoint. Because yes, DoD contracting and being able to win some of those are potentially lucrative for some of these organizations, but at the end of the day, a lot just need the bare minimum of cybersecurity in place, even just internal controls, like regardless of cybersecurity or technology, just like internal controls and process. And that's the first place that most organizations need to start.
Is this a PTSD thing for you, hearing Sal talk about this at all?
No, we have been through this,
Yeah.
over last couple of years. So yes, no, everything he said is right. Like just implementing the multi-factor authentication throughout the company, I still get that. Oh, I forgot my cell phone today. How do I log into my computer, right? So it's not just one time, it's a day-to-day. Training is a big thing. Like, when you do any cybersecurity change, you have to throughout your employees, right? You have to explain them why are we doing this? So get them on board before implementing something new, because it is affecting their day-to-day. Like you come in, you log in, you're in. Now it's like, extra steps and all that, but it's needed. I mean, that's how we see it. It's going to be required for the business that we do. And then we have done a lot of work over the last several years to get where we are. So, but if somebody who is just starting on it, then yes, yeah, you have to make sure like you understand what you are getting into, because it's a lot.
And it's changing too, right? Because Paul, when you and I spoke, a month or two ago, we were talking about some of the changes. You mentioned to me something about getting rid of certain things on paper and having to have all things being digital with certain stuff. How's that from the state side? How are those changes happening? Because times are changing, right? And the way that people get attacked on their computers, that's part of the conversations we have here in this company. Are the ways that people are coming after you are not the same way that it used to be, right? So what are some of those changes that have happened more recently and kind of coming down the pipeline?
Sure. And I think, there, as John said, there's a reason for why all of these compliance issues are in place, right? I think we have to realize that the world that we live in today is that we're all under attack every day, right? I mean, go to phishing things on your phone and all of this, it's all out there. We see examples of it all over the place, and you need to be really aware of that. But what you can do is you need to start moving. What we look at the state of Connecticut is we look at in the manufacturing sector, where is industry going? Where are the larger manufacturers going? And one of the ways that we can eliminate a lot of the risk and to be able to make sure that we're in compliance is to make sure that we're really pushing the digital transformation. What we're really talking about is eliminating paper, which has a great opportunity to have risk in the process, to be able to do that through encoded and encrypted digital files, and to be able to transfer information encrypted digitally between top secret OEMs. Again, when you think of, we build submarines, the plans for those submarines are incredibly classified and top secret. If you're a supplier in that supply chain, you're making a part of that and just a component of that, you need to be as buttoned up as we would expect General Dynamics to be, an Electric Boat to be. And so the best way to do that is to really drive the digital transformation. And we're working on federal grants from the Department of Defense at the state level to drive the digital transformation through the supply chain, the defense supply chain specifically, because that's where we have the federal money from, is from the Department of Defense. But this applies to every business. In the state. It's not just manufacturing either. It's every business needs to have a plan in place to understand that, A, you're under attack, and B, you need to be compliant.
And that's really interesting that you bring that up, because digital transformation is definitely a buzzword in like the IT space and things that people are talking about. But it's funny because we mentioned cybersecurity and all the different things that you have to implement on the cybersecurity side. The digital transformation is a real thing, right? Especially in manufacturing. Like first and foremost is a lot of it is CNC machining, and some of the machines that are used for some of these parts and different things that are being made are ancient, right? They are run off of like Windows 2000 servers or they're on Windows XP machines. Like we see this stuff all the time. And all of those things they're not receiving patches, they're not protected, and the business is run off of those machines. And so that digital transformation adds another layer of cost for our clients to be able to say, hey, if I want to go do this, like you have two options. It's either pay a bunch of money to figure out a way to completely air gap and tie out this old machine that runs the business, or pay a bunch of money to migrate that machine to a completely new thing. And then also now I have to go and train my entire team and teach them how to use the new programs and all these other things. So, there's a catch-22 when you're looking at it from that digital transformation perspective.
I mean, it goes beyond manufacturing too, right? Because I think about the chiropractor that I go to, for example, it's all written down on paper. Everything is my files in a filing cabinet on paper. It's not locked. I could walk right around the corner and pull anybody's files, and HIPAA information obviously is private information. Talk to me from a legal standpoint about this for a sec. Get lawyery on us for a minute.
Get lawyer. So yes, so HIPAA is enforced not only at the federal level, but state AGs have enforcement authority as well under HIPAA. There's a lot of requirements. It was one of the first sectors that was very heavily regulated with respect to privacy, because you want to be able to speak freely to your doctor about your medical conditions and whatever else might be going on. So there's a lot of rules on that. Now, perfect example there's an exception in HIPAA for faxes. When you're thinking in terms of all the devices that you're connecting and everything that's coming in your network, people don't think of the faxes as an endpoint. It's just kind of the old device that's sitting on that corner.
Yeah.
But that itself is vulnerable. Practices will use it because they have an exception under HIPAA. So there's an example of a regulation that needs to be updated to be modernized. So just as the systems need to be modernized, often the law, regulation, or the standard needs to be updated as well. But yeah, the healthcare industry is particularly susceptible because a lot of how the connections are done between your specialists, your hospitals, and you want to be able to have your EMR, your electronic medical records, all in one spot where the doctor can look. Right. Because it turns out having a patient history and all their information is really, really beneficial when you're trying to treat that person. At the same time, all those points of connection are all independent vulnerabilities. And again, it's not a profit center, it's a cost center. And again, reimbursements are being driven down. So you have to do that balancing, but you have to protect your systems.
So how do we go to companies and have that conversation with them, right? Because people don't want to spend money. It ruins some of their profit, but we know that it's a necessity and may become a law at some point where they have, how do you handle that with some of the companies that are like, oh, I really don't want to have to spend money switching to this kind of thing?
Yeah, for us, it's just having open conversations and trying to be creative with them, because at some point, like right now, anyone that's like, I'm trying to go be CMMC compliant, like, well, you don't need to do it all today, right? Like that's first and foremost. Let's figure out what's going to make the broadest paint strokes right off the bat. And a lot of organizations are just missing the basics to start. So it's really having those conversations, but the reality of it is they're not going to have a choice. Like they're going to have to do it. And we're seeing it because manufacturing space, I think, is the one that is really leading the charge there with the change from NIST and DFARS and all of that into actually being audited. Then we saw the changes to SEC regulations, and now CISOs can actually now be persecuted, for their prosecuted. Prosecuted. Sorry.
Persecuted.
Prosecuted. They're similar, and so they can. They're also, being put to task too.
Yeah, for sure.
And then now with the United Healthcare briefs that just happened, they're talking about proposed changes to the compliance side of HIPAA too, and so making that more of you can't just say that you're doing it; it's actually audited and verified. And so I think we're seeing that change across multiple industries now, and something that everyone's going to have to just start taking really seriously.
Atal, the process of doing that, if you guys wanted to try and handle that in-house completely on your own, Would that be a very daunting task to do without having someone get involved, an MSP get involved to help that process along?
And I can only speak for CMMC, right? IT MSP is going to be part of your team. I personally think you cannot do it without having somebody on board. The level of involvement, it depends on the company, right? If you have somebody in-house who knows IT or who is managing your IT, then yes, you don't have to outsource everything. But if you don't have an in-house IT department or a person, then you're going to need a lot more support from your IT MSP to get compliant. Because if they're managing your IT side of your company, then yeah, a lot of those controls that are related to, your company's IT network. There are certain things you can do it in-house, like policies and procedures. That's all your HR or training, some training that's required as part of the CMMC, that's all in-house. So as I mentioned earlier, like separating who is in charge of which control, that helps. You probably need a nice spreadsheet with the owner for each control, and that's how I have it set up. But this way you can pinpoint, yes, this is where I need help, and then this is where I can do it on my own. And then documentation, it's a big part of CMMC. As Sal said, it's not just somebody checking off saying, yes, we have done it. It's the auditor at the end of the day is going to come in and certify you, right? Sure. So going through it, it's one thing, but certain things you have to demonstrate that you have been doing it, or having copies of all the trainings that you have done, and monthly reports that your monitoring of your system, and there is a lot more that's required to be compliant at the end of the day. So yeah, for any small business, I can say if you don't have an in-house IT, you're going to need some help from some folks at some point.
And that's something that we see a lot because, especially in the small to medium-sized businesses, where if you're thinking about the size of those organizations, maybe they have one IT person, right? And, if they have two, great. But the thought process of saying, what is the role of that IT person, right? So say I have an organization, I have 50, 75 people in that company. I have one IT person. I'm responsible for all of the help desk support, anything that you need, your printer fixed, I can't log in, that's my job. Oh, there's a new employee, I have to help set them up. Oh, the employee is leaving, I have to terminate their access. You also want me to write the policies. And then I'm also helping with the technologies that are going end of life. And then I also need to test our disaster recovery. And all of a sudden, this becomes such a daunting task for one individual to do. And so that's where we come into play often is hey, we need help with either a section of this or specifically the compliance itself through a practice. The conversation becomes what is the best and highest use for that individual? And what's the best and highest use of the resources to be able to become compliant? That's really where most of these conversations are coming back to.
Paul, you and I talked about this when we were chatting at the beginning of the year. And I think I asked you the question, how do you do it for not a lot of money? And you mentioned to me about having a group of people that is there for safety, right? You've got a board for safety, and the same sort of thing has to go for compliance. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, sure. So the idea around this is that every manufacturer has a safety committee, right? They've identified that safety is a critical concern for them as an organization. So what they've done is taken 2, 3, 4, 5, depending on the size of their organization, people who get together, and it doesn't have to necessarily be the leadership of the company. It has to be people who are passionate about safety. And they get together and they talk about safety, and when was the last time we had an accident, and do we have all the safety protocols in place, and are we following all of our safety protocols, and are people using their personal protection equipment, and they go through all of that. This is analogous to that, right? I mean, we should be doing the same thing with cybersecurity and with protecting our assets, because quite frankly, what safety is doing is protecting our assets, it's protecting our people, and it's protecting our machines. Well, guess what? In cybersecurity, we're doing the same exact thing, right? We need to protect our assets. We need to protect our our intellectual property, but we also need to protect our people and we need to protect our machines. And so my recommendation to manufacturers is especially small to medium-sized ones, is just make this part of your normal operating procedure. Create a cybersecurity committee and put people who are passionate about this. You'll find them in your organization. They're there. If you'd like your MSP to come in and help you with that process, I'm sure they'd be happy to do that. And then you have a regular conversation about your compliance issues, but making sure that you're shining the right light on it, because you can easily not think about it. And again, we're talking about it. It could easily become a lower priority until it's not.
Mhm.
Right. And when it's not, I'm telling you, it's never good. And to be shut down for a week because you can't have access to your systems, to have to pay a ransom to have access back to your systems, to lose a major client because you're not compliant. These are all real world examples. There was a study that was done that 70% of all small and medium-sized manufacturers say they haven't been victim of a cybersecurity attack. All that means is that 70% of them don't know they were attacked, right? I think we pretty much go back to we're all under attack. So you have to have that mindset, and you have to be able to look at it as just part of your standard operating procedure. We're going to talk about safety. We're going to talk about cybersecurity. We're going to talk about other things that are important, and just make it part of your company's DNA to talk about that. Because when you do that, you raise it to that level of awareness. And you do it, again, it's in the course of people's jobs. So, I mean, is there a cost to it? Sure. But, there is, but it's, again, you think of the investment that you're making each month to have that committee and to make sure they're putting the protocols in place versus the investment you have to make if you have a problem. There's a significant return on that small investment.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you brought me right into this. What is the cost? What happens if you are out of compliance and something bad happens?
Well, let me step back and just dovetail on something Paul was saying. Cybersecurity risk is enterprise level risk. You have a bad day, it's an existential threat. You're going to be out of business, especially with small businesses. Large corporations will go out of business from cybersecurity issues. So in corporate, getting the right people, getting the processes in place, getting everyone involved, and making it a culture of compliance. That's what you really want to do with all the systems that you have in place. Once you do that and have that question, we had years ago, we had a retailer that had a data security incident. A whole bunch of states wound up having a settlement agreement with them. We talked to them again 2 years later. The transformation was phenomenal. Mm-hmm. We were talking to the chief information security officer, the CISO, and they said, I'm now in the room when all the business decisions are made. So we're going into a different market, we're adding a different whatever. And they say, what are the security implications of this business decision? That's where you want to be in terms of compliance. If you're understanding why the compliance exists, it seems kind of odd coming from a lawyer saying, oh, I'm not going to point you to the exact law, say this, this, and this.
Yeah.
But if you do the things for which the compliance was created, again, you're going to be in compliance, especially with cybersecurity.
And if you don't, what happens? What is the harm? You said, you're touching on this. You're all basically explaining that. What happens when someone falls out of compliance? It's a ransom attack. It's, whatever it may be. How bad can the damage be? Can it literally wipe an entire company out?
Yes, it can wipe out a company. You can halt operations. You can infect multiple other companies upstream and downstream, your other suppliers. So one of the things that we always look for when you're doing your risk assessments is risk of harm to others as a component. So when you do that, you're evaluating all the risks, as Paul was saying. It's not just to your systems, your data, but it's the data of your customers, your suppliers, your employees. Once that gets out in the wild, you have identity theft issues, you have shutdown issues. You will, if there's personal information involved, you will have a class action suit filed against you within 24 hours.
Wow. And that's part of the reason why what you're doing to stay in compliance is so important, right? Because you aren't making rubber parts for, I don't know, for my camera or for, whatever, for the water stream going into my house, right? What you're doing needs to stay in compliance because of that issue, right? If you guys fall out of compliance. So are you guys manufacturing things for the government, or why do you have to stay in compliance within your company?
So we manufacture for aerospace and defense industry, right? So that's why the CMMC applies to us. And yeah, it is a requirement, as Sal said, right? Like the law it's there, like the compliance is going to be required. We cannot just check off the box and say, yes, we are compliant. We have to demonstrate we are compliant. So yeah, depending on the business, right? And that's the heart of your business, right? And if that's what needs to be able to work with the Department of Defense and other companies, then yeah, all manufacturers have to comply. That's where you want your business to go for future.
So I'll touch on the idea of managed compliance, because some smaller companies coming in are focused on their company, right? They want to focus on their business. What is the well, we know what the importance of compliance obviously is, but being able to take the headache away from somebody, does it ultimately save them money to do that? Is it a convenience for them? What are the reasons why people end up bringing in an MSP to kind of handle and sort of take care of that kind of stuff?
There's a ton of different reasons why. I look at managed compliance and frankly cybersecurity as more of a insurance policy, right? Like nobody wants to pay for insurance, but when something happens, aren't you glad that you have insurance? And utilizing like a managed compliance program or something like that, where you are going through internal risk or third-party risk, and you're doing real life tabletop exercises of like, in an event, what are we doing? You're testing your disaster recovery. Like those are all really important things to allow the business to continue to function, because the leadership of those companies have a responsibility to make sure that their employees are going to be taken care of. Because if you're reckless with your cybersecurity and your controls and your quality and all of that, like a bad day is a bad day, right? Like they could be all out of a job. The business could be closing down. Like downtime is a bad time for anyone in the manufacturing space specifically, right? Mm-hmm. So it is definitely an insurance policy. If I say it's a revenue stream, I would be lying to you. Mm-hmm. However, it can enable you to produce other opportunities for revenue, right? So it is for the companies that are looking to get into the DoD contracting, right? They can have that ability because they've gone through these steps and they've utilized a managed compliance type program.
Paul, you mentioned to me when we spoke that there are some resources with the states and things that people can gain access to. Talk to me for a sec about that, so that way the people who are watching kind of have a little bit of an idea about that.
Sure. So if you are a Connecticut manufacturer and you're watching, this is going to be very good news for you. If you are a manufacturer outside the Connecticut, let me know when you want to move here. Have you here. So Connecticut has three things in the manufacturing sector that other states don't have. First and foremost, we have a manufacturing caucus, which is both sides of the aisle coming together to understand the importance of manufacturing. We were the first state to create that in 2012. In 2015, the legislature created the Manufacturing Innovation Fund. The Manufacturing Innovation Fund is a fund that's available to small and medium-sized manufacturers to invest in their business. And that fund is managed by a board of which the Chief Manufacturing Officer, which was a position that was created in 2019. Connecticut is the only state with a reoccurring Manufacturing Innovation Fund that's part of our budget on a regular basis, and we're the only state with a Chief Manufacturing Officer, part of the executive branch of government. So we have created programs through the Manufacturing Innovation Fund to support Connecticut manufacturers in their compliance journey. You can get a grant for $10,000 to do a cybersecurity assessment. It's a cybersecurity assessment or a Smart Industry Readiness Index SIRI assessment, where we will have a trained professional come out to your organization and give you a gap analysis as to where you are today and where you need to be and what you're going to need to do to get there. So that is done at no charge to the manufacturer. Obviously, we're paying somebody to do that. We may pay an MSP or somebody like that to come out, and it's not we, the manufacturer may do that, right? We give Hedl the grant, Hedl, whatever she decides to do with it, to get that assessment done, she'll get that assessment done. And again, it has to be, it has to be somebody that's qualified to be able to do that. In addition to that, we have what's called a manufacturing voucher program, which allows you to get a $100,000 matching grant to improve your business. Now, most manufacturers use that to purchase equipment, but you can use that funding towards your CMMC, or you can use it for any other type of compliance. So if somebody comes to you and says, it's going to be $300,000 for you to become compliant, you can tap into the Manufacturing Innovation Fund for a $100,000 grant. It's the 33% match the first time that you use it. So if it's a $300,000 project, you pay 2, the state of Connecticut will give you a $100,000 grant to be able to invest in that. So we're here in Connecticut, we're enabling our manufacturers to be able to take advantage of compliance opportunities, but growth opportunities as well. And we have training dollars that they can use as well. She's shaking her head because she's a consumer of all of these programs, which is great because that's exactly why they're there. They're exactly to support companies just like Airex on what they need to do to stimulate growth, but to help them to be more compliant and to also make sure that their people are trained. So for example, if you wanted to do compliance training or cybersecurity training and you wanted to bring in a third-party resource, we would get any manufacturer under 1,000 employees a 50% grant. So if you had $10,000 worth of training you wanted to do, you go ahead and pay the $10,000, we'll send you a check for $5,000. We'll reimburse that as well. So there's 3 grant programs that are available to Connecticut manufacturers to be able to make sure that they have their compliance programs in place, that their people are trained, and that they have resources to be able to help them make this investment. So we're not making the entire investment, but it's a significant amount going towards making sure that you're compliant. And again, this is an advantage in the state of Connecticut. We've invested $135 million over the last 9 years into the manufacturing sector through the Manufacturing Innovation Fund, through matching grant programs. And in these matching grant programs, we've seen companies grow significantly, through that, where they wouldn't have been able to be compliant without these programs. We have these programs, they're now compliant, and they're getting additional business, and they're growing, and they're hiring more people, and they're creating jobs, and they're creating value in our economy. So that's a way that the state of Connecticut, through the Manufacturing Innovation Fund, is working to help support companies in Connecticut, manufacturing companies. You have to be a designated manufacturer. You either have to be 100 employees or less for one of the programs, which is the $100,000 grant, 300 or less for some others, and then the training is 1,000 or less. So this isn't Electric Boat money or Pratt & Whitney money. This is Airex rubber money, right? How many employees do you have?
25.
25, perfect, right? This is our customer, right? 25 employees, but they need help in order to help support their growth. State of Connecticut is right there by their side to help them.
And it's super cool because not only on that side of the manufacturing, where there's programs for small manufacturers, medium-sized manufacturers, something that we spent some time working with the state of Connecticut on is they also have that from a employee side too. There's a bunch of programs for manufacturers to do apprenticeships and have costs covered and have on-the-job training programs. And those are things that, again, when I was telling you, like, how do we get creative? Like, we were like, hey, you have to do some cybersecurity stuff. Look at these programs, which could potentially offset some of your like employee costs so that you can leverage dollars over here. And then you start combining all those programs together. Like, that's your true unlocker. That's what allows you to be able to really tap into what the state of Connecticut is trying to have our manufacturers do. So there is a lot of really cool
we offer 9 different grant programs. So those are financial programs, but we run 38 different programs through the Office of Manufacturing, all designed around how do we strengthen the manufacturing sector, from some workforce development issues to ways that we drive innovation to improving supply chain resiliency, to reducing the cost of doing business in the state of Connecticut. We're looking at energy and energy costs. And again, to Sal's point, these are all things that free up capital and cash flow for manufacturers to invest back into their business, to be able to become compliant, to get additional business, right? There's this circular economy that says, and quite frankly, the money that we're investing is your money. It's tax dollars, right? So we're taking the tax dollars, we're investing it back into the community. We're creating more tax dollars so we can continue to invest that back in and to continue to grow our economy. And we know the manufacturing sector drives economies. We know that every job in the manufacturing sector creates 2 to 3 jobs in the economy. We know that every dollar in the manufacturing sector is another, $3 into the economy as well. So, the manufacturing sector, by the way, brings in money to the state of Connecticut. What percentage of your customers are outside the state of Connecticut off the top of your head? 25%. So there's 25% of her revenue is not generated from Connecticut companies. It's generated from companies outside the state, bringing the revenue into the state. Manufacturing, when you look at that, there's a significant, we get $22 billion a year from the federal government for defense. That comes from the federal government in here, and that flows down to companies like, you may be making a part for Pratt and Whitney, but the money that they're providing you came from outside the state of Connecticut, right? Because it came from the Department of Defense, right?
Yeah.
So when you start to look at that, the manufacturing sector really drives the economy.
I like that we started this talking about how people are going to get hacked, and we finished it by talking about how much money people are going to save. This is like a right trend for us to go on. I think we covered everything. I wanted to say thank you guys for coming and hanging out with me today and teaching me, honestly, because you're living in it every single day. So it's nice to hear that our state is supporting people and pointing them in the right direction with all of that kind of stuff.